So our last snippet for this week is going to look at Bush's second term, so 2005 through 2008, which winds up being really just a disaster, almost from start to finish. But it doesn't initially appear as if it's going to be that way. This is the result from the 2004 election in terms of the Senate. The bright red states are states that go from Democratic held to Republican held. The purple states are states that the Democrats pick up a Republican seat. So you see, there's this shift to the right in the Senate. In South Dakota, for the first time since 1950, a party leader loses re-election. Remember, 1950, that was Barry Goldwater winning the seat. In 2004, Tom Daschle, who was the Democratic Party leader in the Senate, narrowly loses. The perception is that he is too liberal for his state, which has started to shift towards the right. And then Bush sweeps the South. And here, the same-sex marriage bans I was talking about last time do help bring out conservatives. That Bush was going to win all of these states anyway, but they also help in the Senate. The two seats the Democrats pick up are interesting in differing ways. The Illinois seat, this of course is Barack Obama. We're going to see more about him obviously next time. And in Colorado, Ken Salazar is elected, and in a state that was pretty much a swing state at the time. Salazar will leave the Senate to serve in Obama's cabinet, but his election is an early sign that Hispanics are becoming a more important element of the overall electorate in states like Colorado, which up until this point had been pretty much tilting towards the Republicans. 2004 is going to be the last time that a Democratic presidential candidate loses Colorado. Obama wins it easily in 2008, fairly easily in 2012. Hillary wins it easily in 2016, and Biden is almost certain to win it in 2020. Part of the shift is suburban voters in Colorado, but part of it is that Hispanic voters are becoming a more significant element of the population, and Salazar's win was sort of the early sign of that. But overall, the result of this shift is a more conservative Senate. And as a result of a more conservative Senate, when there are two vacancies on the Supreme Court, Bush is able to nominate quite conservative younger judges to take the vacancies. John Roberts, who will take over as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court after Chief Justice Rehnquist passes away, and Samuel Alito, very conservative appeals court judge, who takes over for the kind of swing vote on the court, Sandra Day O'Connor, who retires after her husband is diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease and ultimately will pass away from this. So the Bush 2004 win does produce a more conservative Supreme Court, but that's about the only accomplishment that we see from the Bush time in the second term in office. Iraq fatalities continue very high throughout Bush's second term. There's no sense that the war is going much better. This is Bush with Vice President Cheney and Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld, who ultimately will be encouraged to resign. The situation does get a little more stable in Bush's last year in office with this policy of the so-called surge, where the U.S. sends in more troops to Iraq, but the long-term stability seems to be elusive. The response to Hurricane Katrina, this natural disaster that breaks the levees in New Orleans and floods this relatively poor, overwhelmingly African-American city, and it's clear the federal government has no idea what it's doing in terms of the disaster response. There are thousands of people who are trapped inside of the Superdome, the football stadium in New Orleans. People are, on their top of their houses. They have these roof signs. Essentially, you have the U.S. government seems ineffective in its response. The head of FEMA, which was Emergency Management Administration, designed to deal with these responses, is a Bush crony, but who is not someone who is particularly up to the job. There was a strong backlash against this just awful case in Florida where a woman named Terry Schiavo has a heart attack, is left in a vegetative state. Her husband wants to, she did not leave a living will. Her husband wants to take her off of life support. But her parents, who are deeply religious Catholics, believe, consistent with Catholic doctrine, that this would be the equivalent of murder, go to court and petition for the ability to make decisions about their daughter. The irony of this is twofold. The first is that the Republicans in 2004 had campaigned with the marriage bans against gay and lesbian couples getting married, had campaigned on this platform of the sanctity of marriage, and now all of a sudden they're saying that the husband doesn't, get to make decisions for his wife. Secondly, there's a sense here that what's going on is politics. The governor of Florida is the president's brother, Jeb Bush. The majority leader of the House, Tom DeLay, is very active in this, and there's this sense that Republicans are using this family's tragedy for their own personal purposes. And you can see the public opinion poll here on the side. And lots of Americans ask themselves, if this happened to my husband or my wife, would I really want the federal government coming in telling me how I would handle these healthcare issues? And then finally, just before the 2006 midterms, there was a scandal in the House involving the House page system. This was a system that no longer exists, but it allowed high school kids, juniors and seniors in high school, to serve in the summer, and they would do errands for House members. And it turned out that a Republican congressman from Florida, named Mark Foley, who had run on this family values platform, was sexting with underage male pages, and that the House leadership basically covered this up. And this becomes, for obvious reasons, a major scandal. With all of this going on, Bush's approval rating just sort of drops, and it continues to drop throughout his second term, hovering around 30% by his last 2 years in office. In the 2006 midterm elections, the Democrats reclaimed control of the Senate. They also take control of the House for the first time since 1994. They win all of the districts on this map that are in purple. The Republicans pick up districts that are in light red. You have to look really hard to see any light red districts on this map, because there aren't any light red districts on the map. Every seat that changes hands in the 2006 midterm goes from Republicans to the Democrats. So what's interesting, though, about this 2006 crop is, if you look on this map, you see lots of kind of big districts going Democratic. These were disproportionately rural districts. The Democratic leadership recruited more moderate Democrats. There were several pro-life Democrats. There were pro-gun Democrats. The Democratic argument was, we need to have a big tent. This is a very different Democratic Party than what exists today. But the result is the election of the first female speaker ever to the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, Democrat from California. And this is a famous photograph of her with all of her grandkids as she gavels the House into session in 2007. So Bush, in his last 2 years in office, is going to have to face a Democratic House, a Democratic Senate, declining approval ratings. It's like, what could possibly go wrong even more? He does have one ally, and that's Mitch McConnell, the new minority leader of the Senate, top Republican in the Senate. And this chart that you see here on the is a chart called cloture votes. Senate, remember, we've talked about this in the 1950s and 1960s, had this custom of filibustering. You break a filibuster with a cloture. And in the civil rights era, that had been 2/3. In the 1970s, the Senate changes its procedures in ways that turn out to be catastrophic to the culture of the Senate. They lower the cloture vote from 2/3 to 60 members, not 3/5, but 60. So it always has to be 60. So on paper, that makes it easier to impose cloture. So you think it would make for less obstructionism in the Senate. But they also allow a process in which the cloture vote can be called at any point in the process. It doesn't require the people who are engaged in a filibuster to actually spend, day after day after day on the Senate floor speaking. So the result is that, in effect, someone who understands the rules, and McConnell really does understand the rules, is to convert the Senate into essentially a supermajoritarian body where you need 60 votes on anything to proceed. This excludes budget issues, and now excludes judicial nominations, although it did not at the time. So the result is that the Democrats can get bills through the House, but they can't get them through the Senate because McConnell is constantly filibustering, and the Democrats can't get to 60 in the cloture vote. Democratic majority in the Senate at the time is only 51-49. And then, just as Bush is about to leave office, we get the economic collapse of 2008. This is a complicated crash where the symbolic event is the collapse of one of the oldest firms on Wall Street, Lehman Brothers, that occurred as a result of this scandal called subprime mortgages. And so basically, you had these investments that, there's a housing boom in the United States in 2004, 2005, 2006. Banks are encouraged, because I think it's going to be very profitable, to give mortgages not just to people who can afford to buy, but lots of people who cannot. When these people can't repay their loans, those loans are called in, but banks that had heavily invested in subprime mortgages are suddenly left in the dark. This is Bush with Henry Paulson, who was the Secretary of the Treasury, and they orchestrate a bailout campaign of these Wall Street firms and big banks with the argument, correctly, I think, that if the banks all go under, the economy will simply implode. Although, as we'll see next week, this triggers a populist backlash on both the right and the left. This sense that the banks are being bailed out, but these homeowners who lost their homes are not being bailed out. The stock market, however, collapses. It loses more than half of its value from its peak just before the financial crash to its nadir in late 2009, and this leads to a kind of pessimistic conclusion to the Bush campaign, to the Bush period in White House. In retrospect, any Democrat was going to win in 2008, given the financial crash. But as we'll see next time, the Democratic race is interesting for lots of reasons other than that. So that's about all that we have for this week in terms of the snippets. I hope that everyone is well and is staying safe, and I will talk to you soon. Okay, bye.